So we're approaching this roundhouse with ash. How old is this?
This is late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, so you're looking at between 3,000 years ago.
This is how they lived.
How they lived, yes. So solid built construction, 10 metres across, average size. They would have had bigger ones than this, 15 to 20. And you've got this single large door frame behind you, solidly constructed, big porch to stop the building from twisting and warping when you've got a doorway in it.
It's got like a mud clay on the outside.
Yes,
is that right?
wattle and door.
Okay.
So there's the wattle frame there. Hazel branches woven together with posts. And then what they would do is they'd have a tandem then, both of them with clay, straw, horsehair or dung, and it'd slap the walls. And that would bond it then. So it just makes it windproof.
And then it's bracken. The roof is
They could have used
thatch.
bracken. This is waterweed.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They could have gotten a lot of that from Anglesey at the time because the landscape was considerably different to what it is now. There was less drainage, farm drainage, ditches, stuff like that. So there was lots of marshland. So getting this stuff wasn't uncommon. But they could even have nice pink heather roofs in some places as well.
So is the basic template for the roundhouse similar across Anglesey?
Yeah. The only difference between Anglesey ones and mainland ones is ours are predominantly stone, not wood. We have found wooden ones, but they're rare, and it could just be because by the time these roundhouses that we found were being built, a lot of the trees had already been cut down. It's very difficult to date roundhouses precisely, because when they abandon the house, they literally clear everything out. Even in some cases, extreme cases, they'll dig out the floor. So the only thing you've got is a stone wall and maybe a few bits of pottery if you're really lucky to date it.
Why would they do that?
Ritualistic, we're not entirely sure, but there are some places in England where upon the house's abandonment they would cross the two stones at the entrance, and that's to signify that the house is dead. It's no longer a physical place of being, but it could be a spiritual home.
Yeah.
Because what they would do then is, almost always, they build a roundhouse right next to it. And when you find these settlements with a huge spread of roundhouses, chances are it could only just be a few families that just lived there for centuries, and their houses are just sort of still there, but they just moved the spot every so often.
Was Anglesey quite wooded originally?
Very wooded.
Oh, okay, so that's changed enormously.
It has, yeah. Oak was predominant. They used to call Anglesey the Dark Isle or Ynys Dywyll because of the amount of oak we had here. It is believed that this woodland was mostly cleared by this period because even in the medieval times people were complaining there wasn't enough wood on Anglesey. So what they would have to do is get their wood from Carnarvonshire. But oak was sacred to the Celts as well. The Welsh name for oak is Derw, so D-E-R-W. And the Welsh name for the Druid, which was the sacred priest, were Derwyddon, so oak worshippers simply. And they used to worship the oak groves on the island, which have all been destroyed because the Romans went out of their way to destroy these. They were perceived as a threat to their authority. But their sites might still have survived in the form of the churches that we've got on the island. And we've got a lot of churches. So it does show, or at least suggest, that Anglesey was a very sacred site.
It's amazing to find so much early archaeology that still remains, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Anglesey's unique in that regard because it's so underdeveloped. They're still finding tons of stuff.
Yeah, they've just discovered 40 human remains digging up along making Llangefni.
Yeah. At the Coleg Menai, Llangefni, They found 46 graves there. So early medieval to medieval cemetery.
So what interests you about the Bronze Age and what time period is this?
So Bronze Age is it's about 4,000, 5,000 years ago, up till around 3,000 years ago, something like that. It's an interesting period because what you're beginning to see is people are getting more settled. Warfare is becoming more of an increasing thing, so you're beginning to see these tribal kingdoms forming. You've also got increased trade, increased commerce between mainland Europe and here. I mean, some of the material that they've found in Europe, the copper in particular for making their bronze tools, has come from North Wales. And they've tested this. So it's a revolutionary time, really. A lot of things are going on.
And how do you think people lived? I suppose they didn't live long, but they would live in communities, small communities?
Yes, it was extended families that would live in these settlements. As you say, they didn't live long, but they lived productive lives. It would show on their bones and their teeth as well, especially with the bread they ate, it wore their teeth down. But they were generally speaking very, according to later sources from the Romans, they had a great sense of hospitality. They would welcome you if you came to your house, they'd offer you a bowl of food, and they would discuss things with you. But they were also braggarts and stuff like that. So if there was a big battle, they'd almost always, you'd get the one drunk warrior in the group that'd say, oh, I killed 50 warriors, show these heads off in the wall then.
And their religion related Druidism, which was a natural sort of observation of the stars and natural surroundings, stones.
It was more earthly, a religion like that. They also didn't believe in one god, they believed in several gods. And some of the gods were in rivers, like the Afan Braint, Afan Alaw as well. Afan Alaw is a sacred site because they've actually found a burial mound nearby which dates from this period. So they were worshipping all these sites before the Druids as well. But the Druids were the ones that sort of formalised the system in a way, because they were so powerful and so sacred themselves. They were the only people that could talk to the gods.
Yeah, because Anglesey was a training establishment for Druids, wasn't it?
Yes.
From all over Europe.
Yes, people used to come here as far as Spain to train to be Druids, according to some sources. So it was a very, very sacred site, and the Romans realised the Romans were hearing that the Druids were the ones instigating the revolt against them, and against their religion as well. So they realised right away this island was a threat, and it had to be quelled. And Suetonius Paulinus, the general at the time, he marched his army across. He might have camped in somewhere like the Roman camp, which is by Bangor University there. He crossed the straits, he met all the warrior class that were refugees on the island, the wild women, the Druids, and the Roman army, initially terrified, they just went ahead and slaughtered everyone.
So, what is this story about the wild women? It may be true or not, the legend that warriors were more scared of the women on Anglesey than...
Yeah.
What is that?
According to the story, there were women on the beach, long dishevelled hair, with black frocks, and all they were doing was screaming and hollering. They might have even had face paint on their faces to make them look more ethereal. But it obviously had an impact on the Romans because they're not used to seeing women in battle that much. They usually they see them as like captives or just the casualties of war. But to see these women in an active religious role in the battle, it must have taken them a bit.
To kill women as well is probably very upsetting.
Well, we don't exactly know how many civilians and citizens would have been there, because what's special about Anglesey as well is there are still tribal place names preserved in the landscape. Because Menai Bridge, the Welsh name for Menai Bridge is Porth Eithwe, which in English means Port of the Eithwe tribe. Then you've got Dyn Silwe Hill Fort, the fort of the Silwe tribe. So there's still places on Anglesey where these names are preserved, and the Romans could not get rid of. They were still preserved in local traditions.
It's difficult then to estimate how many people actually occupied each tribe and how many people lived on the island. How far back it goes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the history of Anglesey goes back 10,000 years. The earliest evidence they found is at Aberfraw, Trwynde. There's a burial mound built right at the top of the actual Mesolithic hunting camp there. But there's no further history than that. There's no Paleolithic evidence, because by that period there were huge glaciers pretty much covered almost the entirety of North to Mid Wales, so you would have little to no human activity here. The earliest activity they found in North Wales and in Western Europe comes from Pontynewydd Cave, which is not far from Llandudno area that way, and that is over just under 250,000-year-old Neanderthal jawbone and teeth, and they're from a child. So they might have either been buried there or an animal predator caught them, killed them and ate them there. We just don't know. They were found in a little cave.
Has there been much done on DNA?
Yes, they've done a lot on the DNA of Anglesey. Some have found Irish roots, some have found Scandinavian roots as well, because Anglesey was an important Viking stopping point really between places like Ireland, the Isle of Man, and the northeast western coast of England. So it was right in the centre, just the right spot. And Anglesey itself is a Viking name. It's Ongle's Isle. So we don't know who Ongle is, but obviously he left a mark. And there's a settlement on Llanbedrogorch called Llynnon, which is a Viking settlement. And the evidence there suggests it was a high status Viking settlement that was abandoned just as the Kingdom of Gwynedd got its act together and no doubt usurped and overruled these invaders.
Ash is going to tell us a little bit about early Bronze Age tools. I suppose they were hunter-gatherers?
They were still hunting and gathering by this period, but they were increasingly becoming more and more settled. Even in the Neolithic, they were still hunter-gathering to an extent. There's little evidence to suggest that they were settling and living in permanent communities, although some of the houses they found could date
So what would
that.
they be hunting?
Well, on Anglesey, deer. They would have hunted wolves as well.
Wolves?
There were wolves in North Wales
Right.
and Anglesey around this period. They would have hunted...
Would sheep have been...
Yes,
they would have been
kept sheep.
shepherds, yeah.
Yes, sheep and cattle. Funnily enough, the sheep and cattle of the UK do not originate from the UK at all. They all originate from the Middle East. Our only native breed was the auroch, which became extinct sort of around 8,000, 10,000 years ago. This bronze dagger has come from Bryn Shenkin.
That's original.
It's a copy, but it's based 100% on the original. So Anglesey Sisu, that little dagger there, it is cast bronze, moulded, and it's got this little wooden handle here. They actually found some of this wooden handle when they were excavating the mound itself. You can still see the mound today if you go down to an old church called Llanidan Church, which is a really nice church. It's got some of the old arches sticking out
What's
like a
the
ruin.
village?
Bryn Shenkin.
Bryn Shenkin, yeah. Okay.
And then you've got these two wood chisels here. The people of the Bronze Age, Iron Age were exceptional carpenters. They were very, very good. You'd be hard pressed to say that it was more the wood age than the stone or iron or bronze age.
To keep these roofs on.
Exactly, yeah. These are solid roofs, 15 tons of weight above your head.
Wow.
And then what you've got there as well is a shaving razor. And that's come all the way from the middle of the island called Llangwyllog, Church of Saint Gwillog. And the Celts used to shave. They didn't have beards. Moustaches were the fashion. Those that did have beards were either considered unfashionable or they were druids. So they could wear whatever they want.
There are ladies like that.
Oh yes, a bit of stubble drives the girls wild, yeah. And then this, when they were hunting, they could use every bit of the animal as a tool. So they'd use, for example, the shoulder blades as spades and the deer antlers as pickaxes. And there's a place in Llandudno called the Great Horn. Right at the top there, there's a Bronze Age mine. You can see, have you seen the little marks in the walls?
Yeah.
They were done by these. So if you feel weight, it's not a heavy tool.
No.
It'd be better than metal down there. And they could of course get that from feasting, so saved them a lot of time and energy. And then what we've got as well is...
Did they leave any communications?
From this period, we don't know whether they did write, but we certainly know that the people in the Iron Age didn't write. At least in Britain, anyway. The Druids knew how to. They knew how to read and write in Greek, because the Greeks were the first to discover Britain, not the Romans. And they chose to write nothing down, because to do so would undermine their authority. Because if someone else learned how to read, well, they'd know all the secrets, all the trade secrets. And we've got here, which is damaged, that's a drill bit. Because they used to be able to drill little shale beads like that.
And that is quite a hammer with a stone, isn't it?
Yeah, this is very handy if the husband comes home late or night. So it's
They swing the
No, they had slings. We've got a sling here. But this is just a hazel branch bent around a pebble with a bit of sinew tied around it. And that's quite simply it. The hammer cannot be any more simpler. But they had slings. There's a sling there. If you were a child using this, by the age of 12 you could hit a crow at 20 paces.
Wow.
So you'd be well trained. It was a life skill. The women would actually teach the children to fight, not the men. So the women as well were competent warriors in those days. And they have to be, because if you've got a raiding tribe here and your husband is off fighting a battle for their war king, you'd have to defend the house. Simple as.
There's a nice example of a mallet.
That's it.
Yeah, for leather or
For leather or for like hammering pegs into the walls. They didn't use a single bit of metal in the construction of the houses. All pegs and joints and rope. Stuff like these were essential for them in their construction. And if you go to look up a site called Must Farm in Cambridgeshire, the archaeologists there have found some stunning evidence of woodwork there. As well as
what's it called?
Must Farm.
Must Farm, M-U-S-T-F-A-R-M.
And if you look for the Sweet track, so S-W-E-T track in Somerset as well, that's a track that literally goes for miles across the marshlands which would have occupied the area. But it was a sacred track as well, because on a lot of bits they find like these polished stone axe heads and stuff from the earlier Bronze Age and the like, and metal artefacts. That's little pots.
So Bronze Age had pottery.
Yes.
As well.
The only problem was something happened to the manufacturing process. Bronze Age pottery was generally regarded as inferior to the Neolithic stuff. You can't cook on a fire with this stuff. If you put this on a fire with water, it would explode. So what you would use it more for was as storage vessels for food, grain, or even cremated remains. And they would use local clays and stuff like that for the construction of their pottery. But to preserve their food, they'd use salt. And in the Iron Age, they'd get their salt from Cheshire in special urns like called briquettes.
Yeah, salt was very important early on, wasn't it?
Yes, oh yeah.
These are the beds up above.
They might have had beds up above, but these are storage shelves.
Oh,
The beds are these little cots that you see here.
Yeah.
6 to 7 in a bed, and 15 to 20 in a house.
Wow.
So quite cosy.
Yeah. They can open and close the hole in the roof?
The roof is sealed.
Yeah.
If there's a hole, the roof would catch alight because of the flue effect. With the door open, it would draw the fire up and it would set everything ablaze. And archaeologists found that out the hard way when they were rebuilding one of these. So since then they realised,
So where did the smoke go?
It just seeps through the roof.
Seeps through.
Just goes right through. So any insects, any vermin, anything like that gets suffocated. That which doesn't suffocate jumps out. Now you might have heard of the old saying, raining cats and dogs. Dates from this period possibly. Because the roofs are so low, your pets, which they would have kept in that period, could jump up on top of the roof, chase the vermin and jump off again. So it looks like almost like it's raining. Raining cats and dogs.
Oh.
What about the owl that lived up there?
We had an owl, a resident owl here, and regrettably, it's passed away.
Oh.
We haven't seen it in 5 years now.
They moved though.
Well, it was an old owl. It had lived about 5 years, and the average lifespan is about that much. Sadly as well, it was that really bitter winter in 2010. It was a really, really snowy, cold winter, and we think that's what killed it off. But they regarded the wren as the king of the birds as well, according to one myth, because the wren was the only bird that was smart enough to hide in the feathers of the hawk, which climbed higher than any other bird, and just jump off its head and fly a bit higher still. Now some people say that the wren was disqualified for cheating by the owl, the wisest of birds.
And that's why they...
But people still adamant, no, wren's king of the birds because it was smart. They'd hunt them and kill them. And they'd go to the nests and kill the chicks and everything. It was just part of the ritual to bring about the new year. It's a bit cruel of the poor little wrens.
It's difficult to get sort of within the mindset of these people during that time and how they must have thought. And We always think we're very advanced, but probably they used their knowledge of what they had to a higher degree, didn't they?
Yes, true, yeah. Well, the way you've got to think about it as well is we consider ourselves advanced, but the stuff they were doing in this period has been lost to us. So it would be advanced to us to see what they can do, and they'd probably be exactly the same as us. They'd be like, you're living far into the future and you don't even know a simple art as, like, for example, creating a mortise and tenon joint. Not a lot of young people know how to do that. Of course there are carpenters, but not many people my age do. So they just sit there and go dumbfounded at how you've lost this skill. Whereas, of course, if you show them an iPad, they'd just be like, what on earth is this thing? This is amazing.
I suppose their minds, they lived by memory, didn't they? Everything was memorised.
Yes.
So they actually possibly used more of their brain in just the depth of what they kept in active memory.
Yes, yeah. Well, they'd use more like stories and mythos. So like every place would be associated with a little story, a little myth. And also what they could use as well is standing stones. Now the purpose of standing stones is unclear, whether they're monuments to mark the sun, whether they're actually grave monuments, or whether, as I said, they're just monuments to mark tracks and routeways. Because a lot of standing stones are situated not far from roads. So they could mark meeting places like Celtic crosses or crosses in village squares and places like that in the medieval period and up to today.
And they're very technical at observing the stars and using the exactness of the stones, both vertical and horizontal, to measure the time of year, possibly for farming. Yeah, I think the rock is significant in different ways, different levels.
Yeah. I think just because they didn't write it down, we don't know. So we could be either over-analysing it or not analysing it enough.
Now, Snowdonia, that rock is Ordovician, isn't it? Which is volcanic.
Yes.
And quite... Whereas the rock Anglesey is volcanic as well?
Anglesey is everything. You've got metamorphic, sedimentary and igneous here. It's what one geologist has described as the world on a handkerchief. We've got some of the oldest fossils in the world by Llanbadrig, so Patrick's Church there. Fossil microbes. I think they're about over 1 billion years old, some of the fossils there. You've got limestone, sandstone, you've got granites of all kinds, even slates, schists, everything on this island. This area is dominated by green and blue schists, whereas where I'm from, Coedana, I'm actually sitting on a huge seam of granite which almost cuts the island completely in two.
How unusual.
Yeah, well, North Wales is like one of those weird areas. You've got so much activity going along here that Anglesey in particular has just been sort of sitting in the middle of all these amazing world events, and it's just today is formed to what it is now, an island with not only a rich history but an even richer geological history. I mean, geological students come here specifically just to study Anglesey stones. That's how important it is.
Now tell me a little bit about the legends. You've got Llandwyn Island and Dwynwen, the patron saint of
lovers, yes.
And that, I suppose, is 5th century, so it's a bit further on when Christianity is arriving, isn't it? Just about, pagan still, but...
Yes,
Are there any other legends that you find you're attracted to?
Just down the road from here is the legend of Branwen, and the burial mound I was talking about, the Bronze Age burial mound, is called Beard Branwen, and it is one of the Mabinogion stories, the 4 branches of the Mabinogion. You've got Bran the Blessed, Bendigeidfran, the giant king of Britain, and you've got Matholwch, the Irish king, and she believes her involvement caused the rift between Ireland and Wales. And she broke her heart and died with grief by the River Allow, which flows through here. And they built this burial mound on top of it.
Wow.
But there's also the story of a wyvern that used to live on the island by what is now a dump, believe it or not.
Sad.
So bless her, the poor little wyvern wouldn't be too happy
No.
But there are stories dotted around here and there.
How do the stories get preserved? Again, has that been an oral tradition that finally, I don't know, maybe medieval times they decided, well, maybe we should write this down?
Yeah, a lot of it is that, and a lot of it as well has been Christianised. So some of these stories, the nature and the meaning of it has changed. Like a lot of these stories about Welsh saints, people regard them as vindictive in nature. They're quite nasty people. But maybe that's because they're based on a Bronze Age story about this local god, but they've applied it to the background of a Celtic saint as a means of quick conversion by just saying to the locals, oh, you've got it wrong, it's not the god, it's a saint. And that just makes it easier then to convert the masses.
There's a huge number of holy wells that still exist around both the Llynnon Peninsula, Anglesey and Snowdonia that still survive.
Yes, there's two good ones. There's one in Penmon, of course, there, St Serial's well. You've got one by Llan Eilian. It's a nice well there as well. Gwenfrewi well, I think it's called, I'm not sure. And some of them have been destroyed. There was two very famous wells at a place called Clorach, which is right in the middle of the island near a place called Llanachanedd. And that is where Saint Cubby from Caergybi, he would meet up with Saint Serial from Penmon, and he would meet there for a chat to wash their feet every so often. But when they built the new road, they destroyed Saint Serial's well, I believe, but Cubby's is still preserved.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And it is a pilgrimage site, so there's probably stuff still there.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ash. Thanks.
You're welcome.